Well, hello, folks. This is Ampdpanda with the first episode of the podcast. Welcome. All those few and far between in the ocean of podcasts, thanks for joining this one here, this intro and episode 1 of the Ampdpanda podcast. This is your host, Ampdpanda, and we're going to talk about, why are we podcasting? Well, I can tell you and include the reasons all ultimately that came to this particular moment here of the reason why. The answer to this question is yes, probably towards the end of the podcast. But first, let's talk about why we're podcasting in the world today. Well, just to get started and even include of the reasons why, again, my name is Ampdpanda. I live here in the lovely states down south of the United States of America, here in North America. And I had decided to do a lot of different podcasts because the world that we know it and the world that we live in have tons of voices, tons of characters, and many people of many different backgrounds, fields, origins, and everything. And I decided to add my voice to that. You might be asking yourself as to why I'm doing that and why I'm adding a voice to it. Well, clearly put, it's just to talk, just to discuss the feelings, the thoughts, and everything that comes between that I have in my little head here to share with you fine folks here that are interested in the world of where I live and how I get there. I am a 30-plus-year-old individual of the 90s, born in the 80s, looking to excel in this world of fatherhood with a daughter and wonderful wife, 3 basset hounds, as well as in the world of gaming that I grew up and loved. Those of you out there probably know all the things about various different gaming technologies in the world. My world came from the world of PC tech when PCs weren't a norm. Smartphones weren't a thing. Your cordless phones were actually corded and did not have buttons on the cord itself. And not only that, there wasn't anything as far as a screen other than a digital readout of what the time was and if you're on the phone or off the phone with a cord that only reached about 5 to 10 feet. Sometimes even less, depending on what corded phone that you had. In a middle to low income class individual and family, and kind of middle class still to this day. I wouldn't even consider that now due to inflation in all the world today. So just know that these thoughts and feelings are for you out there and for those that want to become part and learn in the world of Ampdpanda. Again, I grew up in the world of PC technology when Gateway had the cow prints on the boxes with the computers that had big, huge CRT screens and movable discs. No digital downloads, the internet is in its infancy, and DOS was the prominent program to play video games. And you know what? I enjoyed every minute of it now, reflecting on that, and wish that it was still here to this day. And to some degree it is, When we've got all of these programs and digital media, it's great that we can get these things at our fingertips in an immediate time. But there's just some feelings and thoughts of nostalgia that I miss going to a store, going to the actual aisles, and seeing even the metal frames of where discs would lay on with countless amounts of different CDs and discs that I can grab, pick up, and actually read at the cover, kind of like the cover of a book. But now it's just a CD case in this particular instance. But as you know, now most of it's digital. Big boxes aren't a thing. Discs and diskettes are no longer a thing, and hard disks are barely a thing as well. Vinyls are still around, which is shocking to me, but I love the sound of a vinyl. Anyway, I digress. But this is the world that I'm experiencing with a less than 1-year-old daughter, a nice wife of, well, let's say, I know this is a trap. I don't know why I'm trying to put myself on the spot of 7+ years marriage, but been together for even more, probably double the time. Basset Hounds are my favorite breed of dog, as they are the laziest and the goofiest with the best personalities in the world of wonderful, wonderful hounds. The strongest of noses that they never actually use when it comes to searching. But anyway, let's go back to the subject at hand. Why am I doing a podcast? Well, the podcast, in its actual form and definition is that it's a program made available in a digital format to download over the internet. Now, if that's the case, if that's just the pure definition, which I'll be honest, I got it from Wikipedia, then that kind of means that all content creators have a podcast of some sort. But I would say this is more or less in the digital audio format only, which is kind of what is being specified in a lot of cases where you can actually grab and download these things. But I'll start even from the beginning of all the times that I've experienced individuals and folks convincing me to try to do a podcast. But that is not just the crux and the only one reason of why I'm starting a podcast with you today. So it was interesting. As I've grown up in the world of high school and a school of many times, I've experienced very immense, intense, and craziest of events that you just wouldn't even fathom and would think it's just a made-up story in a book or in a movie or in an episode or an episodic episode, maybe an episodic episode of a podcast, but here we are. Growing up, I myself wanted to be in the notable world of being an honorary public servant, as I worked in the world of law enforcement, being security and a few other things. I even learned it through school and thought it was a very fun and amazing profession. And, to those out there that are in the law enforcement police force that's doing the good stuff and the good deeds and the good things that you do in a positive way without corruption, props to you, because it is such a difficult job to do. And I know this only firsthand for dipping my toes into it for probably 6 to 7 years. But growing up in a, kind of an outskirts, boondocks type of upstate, kind of northern state outside of a major city, I got to see the most interesting of things. Anything from, kind of knock-ins with SWAT teams kicking down doors and basically checking to make sure there's any drugs, drug busts, and any violent aggressors in a domestic dispute in a middle to low-range income home. As I worked as a lovely security officer there, which all led up to final shootouts and murders that ended up occurring that honestly could not really just kind of explain in this one single podcast, but it is a story that I had to always bring up either in different times where I'm discussing over dinner with my family or even talking to coworkers at my work where they were literally saying, you know what? You should do a podcast. And this came from somebody, we'll just kind of say her name is Sally. Sally in the tech industry is an SEM, which is really just a search energizer or actually it'd be in this case, search optimization manager, who basically emphasized in how to actually and worked in the expertise of doing the best way of search optimization for the company, where she literally would tell me that several years ago. Me, I just kind of shook it off and said, you know what? That sounds great. That's a nice compliment. Obviously, not really a thing for me. Why would I do such a thing like that? Hell, why would I even get in front of a camera and do videos like I do on YouTube, which of course is related to this particular subscription and YouTube name here if you want to subscribe for free and get any updates related to that, gaming and tech. Yes, I know, selfless plug. I can't help it. But anyway, we'll move further in my life of why we should do the podcast. And honestly, the next few things is always bringing this up over dinner and talking about my tough, action-packed adventures that I had going in the outskirts of a northern state and the upstate of a outwards small community on the outskirts of a major city, which you can kind of tell if you really wanted to piece this together. There's not very many. But in this particular case, a lot happened during my 17th and 18th year of high school, where I got to actually learn about the law enforcement things firsthand. Another story that usually kind of comes up and says, hey, maybe you should do a podcast, is when you go work for part-time at a medical center and you're a security officer there, learning your heartfelt mind on how to figure out the best way to get into law enforcement and be a police officer, when you have to actually be told, hey, you're new on the job, you're the rookie, you got a nice little uniform there, we got this dead cadaverous body we need you to transport down to the morgue. What do you feel about that? Of course, my young little mind thought it would be the easiest and most wonderful thing to do, until you see the bags that you know only horror movies tell you and show you in video games, that really there is a dead, decomposing body. And of course, your mind wanders as the decomposing bag of horror that comes in front of you, where your mind wanders from horror movies to see, is this person really, really gone? And you start to think, did it move? Did it move around? Was that a reaction? Was that just a gas bubble that just came out, which does happen, by the way? And of course, no, you think to yourself, it's nothing. It's just my wits and thoughts. And then they take you to the most farthest area in the medical center that no one has gone to for what feels like months and years, down to the most freakiest and most silent of areas, down into the morgue, to transport this cadaverous, demonic, evil-looking thing from my head, which really is just a bad of someone passing into the next world, having to be put into the freezer and slide out metal frame where they rest until they're prepared for the journey down in either the fires of Mount Doom or into the areas of soil and rot and decay in the most specialized and beautiful of fields the world has ever seen. And of course, I tell this story all the time, being a 17-year-old. And sometimes, when folks ask me about it, they're like, you know what? Maybe you should do a podcast, which was a few years later. This time, it was in front of my family eating dinner, surprisingly enough. Luckily, the hunger wasn't spoiled amongst the individuals hearing this story. Of course, I don't usually get into the specific details of these young adventures of Ampdpanda, but here we are. And everybody just basically says, you should do one, and let's move on and never talk about this again. Being a 17-year-old, I was very blessed being able to perform such activities and get such opportunities, which did kind of open up my eyes to the different things of life, of what's special, what really matters, and what the priorities are. As we move forward in my life on few other events of why I should make a podcast and why I should be talking about these thoughts and ideas that I have in my head, well, supernatural occurrences of plentiful events. As you know, if you live in an area that is wooded with trees, beautiful stars, and the brightest of moons, sometimes crazy things can happen in the woods that you just never expected. Me living out in the outskirts of where I was, I've had very different encounters, everything from the most of interesting of ghostly encounters from old wartime heroes to UFO phenomenon that even Fox Mulder would be proud of. But again, I say, when I talk to either my sister and others and individuals and friends, when they ask me in that nice introduction as you move on to the next startup and getting hired, tell us an interesting story. And I tell them, and then they say, you should start a podcast. That's right. you should start a podcast. Again, after the third or fourth occurrence of this and telling all my different stories, I am told this, and even in my mind, I'm like, I'm not a video person. I'm not an audio person. No one wants to hear these stories and hear all of these tales of the Ampdpanda channel that I have. So as I move forward in the noble profession of law enforcement, I decide that I just don't want to do law enforcement, but I want to try in the actual appeal of using EMT, medical direction, and skills of saving a life in a paramedic vehicle. And you know what? Known as an ambulance. And you know what? It was fun, it was great, and I enjoyed it, but it was very, very short-lived as the emotions of these fearless and epic of individuals out there that are actually saving the lives in that golden hour with the ambulance. I just thought it wasn't for me, mainly due because of the fact that I wanted my emotions. Over time, when you start becoming an EMT specialist, you work and work and work, and you do so much in studying and getting approved by the boards, getting all your certificates, getting all the medical direction, and seeing all the horrid and awful things that happen to individuals, either escaping alive or not, that really takes a toll on yourself, and I myself could not do it. I remember the hardest and most difficult call I had to experience is someone of a young age playing with a friend in a house where the parents have gone out for a party in the countryside, and they decided to find their old weaponry of, well, let's just say, an old ancient weapon of black powder shotgun descent with a double barrel, and decided to play around with it. And in this particular case, it was fortunate as the individual only got a scatter shot into his arm with a nice big old slug bouncing around in his chest and intestines to only not even just clear any major arteries so it didn't bleed out, but also of any major organs as well, where all it affected was the bones and some slight nerves in his arm. And I mean, the ultimate conclusion to that, after 3 ambulances made it there with us number 2, helping getting the person on the stretcher and not even telling us how the story happened and occurred, they were able to survive and get to the ER appropriately. And they made it there and did it just fine. And then they basically kind of said, don't tell my parents, which I'm like, I'm sorry, kid, it's too late. Stuff happens, they gotta be told. And not only that, we got to have major surgery because your arm is in a bit of a ruckus. Luckily, nothing too crazy, just an entry wound with no crazy extremities and portions missing, but just all internal damage and all internal problems that occurred, which all just needed major surgery to get all of those black pellets out and the major slug and get the appropriate healing that needed for the child. Obviously, they don't have a really great throwing arm is what the ultimate conclusion was, but wasn't fatal for the kid, and we're very happy that that occurred. And if you're listening there, child, which I won't say other than your name was Alvin, I hope that you're doing fine and doing well, especially after that day. But yes, later on in my life, as I continued to move forward with the whole technology piece into the second and third startup in the gaming space here, learning the entire new team that I program manage and quality assure on testing their gaming products. Of course, they bring around the circle and ask, hey, tell us an interesting story or interesting fact about yourself. I tell them I was an EMT for a brief moment. And then they ask me about a good story, which that one's going to be one of the best. And then they say, you know what? Maybe you should do a podcast. And again, at this point, we're talking about 5 years beforehand. And I'm basically saying to myself, you know what? There might be something to this. But there's no way I would ever do some sort of thing like doing a podcast because I'm not fun. I'm not interesting. No one wants to really listen to this voice that I have here. But you know what? We're going to keep moving forward. until we get closer to today being in the gaming industry than I am. I've worked in the gaming industry in a few number of games, anything from indie games, mobile games, AAA titles, and you'll even see my name in some credits. I tell you what, if you want to comment and ask me what games those are, I'd be more than happy to list them out. In my tech world, I started in the quality assurance way of life by testing games over and over. And no, if you're going to comment and say that it's like Grandma's Boy, it's really not. It's not the same thing. You can't tune up the graphics on level 5 and have the other graphics different. It's all one engine and one setup and one development process. And no, we don't live under our desk, at least in the instances where I was. Now, there were definitely some late nights, even some 12 to 24-hour shifts on major game releases that I actually enjoyed speaking and talking to users as they installed their game and needed some technical support, as well as any bug reporting that was brought down the line as part of those major releases. In fact, there's some particular MMOs I greatly enjoyed and our expansions releasing, and I very much enjoyed staying up at 2 to 3 in the morning, helping every single MMO player that needed assistance and technical support with their toasters of a computer that they just could barely have running and was able to hit it. The most proudest achievement of mine is being able to get an old 10-year-old game to be able to work on a 5-year-old newer computer and being able to get it to work at the best FPS possible. That would be frames per second for those unacquainted. And then being able to not only do that, but have the controls mapped out correctly to either their gamepads, mice, or keyboards that they're using specifically. Of the classic games that I grew up and loved to enjoy, and technical supporting that for these individuals that needed it, it was such a wonderful piece of technological challenges that I enjoyed greatly in the quality assurance world. And I say again, when I moved on to that and moved on to other MMOs, being a program manager, and tell them all the companies I've worked for and some of the events and games that were included, they would always say, why don't you start a podcast? Again, at this point, I always thought, you know what? I don't think so. I'm just going to continue working in the field of gaming, and maybe I'll make my own video game. And maybe I will continue to make all of these wonderful testing bug reports for all the developers that either get frustrated and angry at me reporting it, which I feel for you developers who code and do countless amounts of coding to try to get stuff to work. And you know what? I applaud you. I tried to be a coder myself through college, and I definitely could only get to a certain part automation, while the front of me was like, you know what, I'd rather just draw. So I'm going to draw in 3D, and that's actually what I got my degree in. With many game design concepts in a very competitive world, there's a lot of individuals out there that really want to make a game. And you know what, I applaud you and hope you do well in your successes, and hope you do well in your professional careers making a wonderful and fantastic video game for all to enjoy. And now we come to our final conclusion, which I actually should have started with, but actually is one of the more interesting stories of my childhood. And yes, I might sound like I'm gloating, but I'm really not. I've just been very fortunate and very enjoyable in experiencing all these different events and things. And you know what? This is just a piece of that, as I continue to emphasize and focus more on as we move further into the podcasting world. But this is why I podcast and why I'm podcasting. As a young boy of 6 years old, I went to Disney World. As those individuals that have gone to Disney World at such a young age, it's always a wonderful and just eye-opening experience, as you just feel like you're getting a piece of the additional fantasy world underlying in our real world today. And in this particular case, this young lad was able to go to Magic Kingdom and see the massive Disney World and Kingdom Castle that they have there. And I know it's not Kingdom Castle, but I'm just going with that right now because I can't think of the name of it. The big castle in Magic Kingdom that you see with all the fireworks at night exploding and all the laser work that they put together. Probably not on a nightly basis, but sometimes they have that and sometimes they don't. Where they'll have a nice parade. It'll be kind of a historical event. It could be a seasonal event with Halloween, which Halloween is my favorite, by the way. It could be a Christmas event. And sometimes they just do it just to celebrate Fantasia with Mickey Mouse. And me as the young lad beforehand, before that great night of fireworks, having my racing Mickey Mouse hat on my head, I got to enjoy all the classic ideas and classic movies showing how these cartoons are made and how they're brought to life and walking beside me and talking to me. One of these characters was the greatest and the most well-known wizard of our age, Merlin. And Merlin himself needed to find the one and true knight that was going to take over the realm for King Arthur as he's going on vacation, because King Arthur always goes on vacation, and they always need to find the one individual that can not just rule the realm, but rule the realm by pulling the sword out of the stone. And you know what? I stood in that crowd and was with other individuals there, and the Wizard of Merlin, who had the big pointy blue hat with stars, with the nice ward, well, probably more of a bathrobe than an actual, mage's robe, pointing around with this little fancy stick, trying to find the brightest and smartest and most wonderful of individuals that could go and pull the sword out of the stone and be able to conquer the realm in its infancy. And you know what? He pointed that little stick to me and said, "You could be the one." After he pointed two adult individuals that just looked like they wouldn't be the individuals you'd pick in a fantasy story. But you know what? It would have been great if they would have picked these adults to rule the realm. Maybe they could have proper accounting. Maybe everyone could have magical dust so that they all could be wizards. Or maybe everyone could be knighted in order to defend the kingdom for all of its glory. But no, not in this case. They decided to choose this young man as the other adults attempted to pull the sword on the stone with no avail. However, I wallowed my way up there. I pulled on the sword, and guess what? The sword was pulled. Of course, they couldn't pull a real sword because that would just be a disaster for any individual looking to wield a sword around and start hitting people. No. I was able to pull it out to a good amount of degree where Merlin then announced and dictated that I myself would be known as the ruler of the realm, temporary of course, while King Arthur is out on vacation. He gave me a crown, he gave me a nice cape, and a royal kind of dress up right in front of the individuals as they announced that I was now the ruler of the realm for about 10 seconds before they took it all away and said that King Arthur is now back from his vacation, as they put the medal back on me and said, "Keep this medal as you were the ruler of the realm," which I still have to this day. It's funny that I bring this up to you in a vehicle where I'm driving with my mother and my sister of 30 plus to 50 plus years, as they then talk about the great times that we all had as children, and I always talked about that, to finally being told that, hey, I knew somebody at Disney, and I told them to do it for you. Now I'm just telling you now, after about the 30 plus years that I've grown up as an adult, thinking I was a randomly selected individual, but now to know that the game itself was rigged to begin, and that I was just given this opportunity for known input and known internal reference of somebody putting a request to make this boy's magical dream come true, which I thought was great and wonderful at the time, even to this day, and I still appreciate it. But man, it used to be much more magical not knowing that. So I tell this story sometimes, especially when I'm talking to individuals, and they always mutter those same words. Why not make a podcast? And you may think, after all of these times, after all of these years of being told, why don't you make a podcast, that I should actually make a podcast. But it was none of these things, I tell you. None of these things, my friends. The one thing that told me and pushed me over to make a podcast was an email from YouTube saying, hey, you should try putting a podcast together because, hey, it's a nice opportunity and a nice way to get started. So here I am today with you, putting the first episode 1 of the Ampdpanda podcast, putting this together on YouTube from a generic automated email from YouTube. I hope I didn't spoil your day letting you know the internal merits of what happened to what caused me to make this podcast. But it is the honest truth, and it is something that, believe it or not, I do have a passion for, and you will continue to see. So that's going to conclude episode 1 of the Ampdpanda podcast, for I have created the podcast due to requests from multiple individuals throughout my life, but mostly from a YouTube email saying you should try it, and I'm trying it today. The theme of this going forward in all these episodes is to talk interesting stories, interesting opinions, but all positive in the way that we try to live today. There's a lot of negativity, a lot of terrible things in the world of social media, as well as other places in the world. Why not try to find the brightest of lights to try to make your day better? And here it is, the Ampdpanda podcast. If you've enjoyed this wonderful episode, please go ahead and share it amongst your friends. Let them know to subscribe to the YouTube channel and music that I have here as far as the podcast goes. And we'll see you in the next episode as I try to continue to work this through on a weekly basis. Thanks for joining. Have a great day. I'll catch you next time.